Christian parenting.
I was so afraid, like there's some hard stuff in my kid's life, and that initially created some fear in me. But knowing that, like, the Lord's in charge of this, and He loves my kid more than I do, and she's the Lord's daughter more than she is mine, and He's going to take care of her. And so to trust some of these things just back on the Lord and be like, God, you're going to have to take this.
Hey families, welcome back to the Call to Love podcast. As you know, each week we dive into the practical, the clinical, and always most importantly, the biblical aspects of the adoption and foster care callings. And today we are going to dive into a really important topic, and that is talking to our kids about their adoption story. This can be really intimidating for us as parents, not knowing how to navigate it properly, not wanting to mess it up, and most importantly, wanting to lean into the Lord and how we guide ourselves and our kids through this conversation. So joining me for this conversation is my new friend, author and adoptive and foster mom, Kate Ridema. She is a mother to 5 daughters through birth and adoption and has cared for many others during her 10 years as a licensed foster parent. She's the author of 3 books and dozens of magazine articles, and speaks and leads Bible studies at churches, schools, and even through jail ministry, which is so awesome. Kate, you're doing some fantastic work. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for being my guest. Welcome.
Oh, well, thank you, Summer. It's really fun to be here. And thank you so much for the work that you do, because when I started our foster care journey 16 years ago, there just was not the kind of resources that there are now. And so it's so fun to know that the foster and adoption community has podcasts like yours, just for encouragement and for educational purposes. And so I'm so excited about the work that you're doing, Summer.
Thank you so much. It's honestly, I feel the same way. When we started about 12 years ago, 13 years ago, and same thing, it just felt barren of resources. We looked, I desperately looked. And that's why I tie in the whole thing of, we want to lean into some of the clinical aspects, but I needed guidance. I needed community. And so that is certainly my heart behind what I do here, and why it's such a blessing to get to meet fellow friends and families in the fight with us. And I say fight because it can be a battle, just with all the things that we experience. And so our families and our listeners know that. And so it's just an honor to get to talk with authors like you. And you specifically, I got so excited. She sent me a little care package in the mail the other day, and it had some of her children's books. And if you're watching on the YouTube video, you can see these beautiful illustrations and in the covers. And so I would encourage you just to hop over and check that out on YouTube if you're listening to this. But she has authored several different resources that are fantastic companions to be able to begin those conversations, and even some little conversation cards, which I think are so cute. I love this. Just to introduce that conversation with our kids. So let's just start a little bit, Kate, by allowing our listeners to get to know you a little bit better. I shared that you're a mom of 5 daughters, that you're an experienced foster and adoptive parent, but tell us a little bit more about you and why you do the work that you do.
Oh man, I don't even know how long to spend on a question like this, because every kid that we have had has made such an impact on our family and has grown me and stretched me. And the Lord has used every child in such a really special way. And so I want to introduce all of them to you. But throughout the years, I have been mom to 18 biological, adoptive, and foster kiddos. And if I were just meeting you at one of my kids' sports events, if this was just small chat, I would tell you I have 5 daughters, and, they range in age from 7 to 17 years old right now. But because we are in this space, and all of your listeners understand just the complicated stories and family dynamics that come with being a foster home, I can just share that the kids that we have had ranged in age from 10 days old up until 18 and aging out of the foster care system. With us, we have had medically fragile kiddos. We have had a teen mom who came with her baby. We have worked with kids through our state's traditional foster care system. We have also worked with something called TFC, transitional foster care, which helps kids who have crossed the Mexican border as unaccompanied minors. And so we've
Oh,
had kids from
wow.
Honduras and El Salvador and Guatemala, kids who don't speak English. And we've just had a range of really unique and fun and growing experiences.
That is incredible. I'm so glad you shared all that and take all the time you need to share that because that's so important. I mean, the Lord has given you so many opportunities to love and embrace children from all types of situations and backgrounds. And I mean, talk for a minute just about how the Lord first introduced you to this calling. Where did that all begin?
Mm. I think that that was something that was always just kind of in my heart. I think that's something that the Lord placed in me from a very young age. I knew that I was going to be a mom to lots of kids and to kids who, don't have the kind of stable homes that I came from. And yeah, so when my our firstborn was about a year old, I started to learn about foster care, and this was not an idea that I had really understood or knew much about. I didn't know anyone who was involved with foster care, but there was a radio show that I listened to, and that year it was highlighting stories of foster and adoptive families, and how that just was really appealing to me. It seemed really accessible too, because the only form of like adoption that I really had in my mind was like international adoption, right? Like that used to be a lot more popular than
Right.
it is now, just because of legislation and so forth.
Right.
But that seemed like, oh, so tricky and so far away. And so when I learned about such a huge need for kids so close to home, that really struck me. And so we just kind of took one step and then the next step and then the next step, calling an agency and setting up a meeting and starting, with paperwork. But that was definitely a long process. It is a lot of work to kind of become established as a foster home. And so we had our first placement when our second biological child was just a baby. And yeah, maybe over the next 10 or 12 years, there are times that we took a little break from care for a little while. There's times that we were open only to respite or emergency type placements. And so, that can kind of change with how your life feels at the time, with what's going on with the kids who are already in your home. But yeah, it's just been a really wonderful experience as we lean just really hard into the Lord, asking Him, what do you have for our family?
Yeah, I love that. And so, at what point in your journey did adoption become a part of your story?
Well, of course, the goal of foster care is always reunification with parents, and that was definitely my heart, is to want to see families become whole. And but we know that doesn't always happen. And with our very first placement, that was a little boy who sustained some really severe injuries from his birth family when he was very, very young. We picked him up from the intensive care unit when he was just 10 days old. And he was not able to go back to parents just because that did not look like a safe option for him. And when he was several months old, we were asked if we would be open to adoption. And that was a really, that was just a really hard question, because I did not feel like I was his mom, and I really couldn't put more words to it than that, except that I felt like his mom was someone else. And like we kind of alluded to earlier about how there just wasn't a lot of resources, not a lot of support, and not a lot of our friends and family really understood, this whole idea of fostering. And so they all kind of thought I was crazy, and I kind of thought that I was crazy. And, but I had to pretend like I wasn't, because I was saying
Yeah.
like, no, I feel like the Lord really called us to this. And so because it's something I felt like the Lord called me to, I felt like I had to be fine. And so I was trying really, really hard to be fine. And it was so difficult. But like once we had this little boy in our home and we loved him and our friends and family grew to love him, then, they absolutely thought like, yes, of course you should adopt this little boy. You have two girls. And so now to have a boy, how perfect. But I just really could not shake this feeling that his mom was out there somewhere. So ultimately we said no to his adoption. That was a really hard thing that took me a while to kind of recover from. The Lord was so kind and he was so gracious in all of that. He affirmed that just through some really, I just wish we had time to kind of go into some of those stories, because it was just so beautiful how the Lord brought his mother into our life and how the Lord confirmed that for us. And after that, we took a little break from fostering. And when we came back, it was definitely with some renewed passion and renewed energy. And I just kept praying like, Lord, prepare my heart for this next child, prepare my heart, get us ready. And when she came, when that next little kiddo came, well, we had several other placements within there, but when my adopted daughter came to our house, it felt different. Like I felt like I was her mom in a way that I hadn't experienced with so many of the other kiddos. But we were initially working towards reunification for her. Ultimately, that was not able to happen. And after her being in our home for about 2.5 years, we were able to adopt our daughter. And so that now is our youngest of 5.
I love that. That's amazing. I want to go back to, just what between those two stories that you just shared. I think that's so important. And we've had listeners recently who have sent emails saying, hey, I'm in a really tough spot where I just don't know if I should give that yes, if I am this child's mother who
Mm-hmm.
they're actively fostering. And so can you dive a little bit more into me of just how the Lord made it clear to you that one child was not meant to be yours and one child was?
Oh man, I don't even know if I can do that. I think it's just leaning really hard on the Holy Spirit. I
Yeah,
just think it's really seeking the Lord's will in that, because our yeses don't always make sense and our nos don't always make sense.
that's so
And
good. Yeah.
so I think that, we have to be really practical too, right? About what is going to work for your family, what kind of capacity you have. But ultimately, the Lord can grow our capacity to meet the needs if he's prompting us to say yes. But in that particular case, it was just a no. And I don't know how to describe that more than just, that was the Holy Spirit working in my heart and in my mind. And same for my husband. My husband felt that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are both really good points as far as being in unity with your spouse for
Mm-hmm.
those who are married. And then, there is peace in that. Even when on paper it doesn't make sense, God
Mm-hmm.
will give you peace in the answer that you're meant to give. And so I think that's a really good point. That's a great way to answer that, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. And you've said it a couple of times, and I absolutely agree with you. And I've heard this so many times from other guests that I've been able to interview. It's like, we couldn't find the resources. We didn't have. So of that, God has used that to inspire those to create those resources.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a part of your story. And so we're talking today about when and how to talk to your kids about their adoption
Mm-hmm.
story. And it is so complicated. So based on your experience, Kate, how and when is it good and appropriate to start speaking with your child about their adoption story?
Yeah. Well, we are all very aware that our adopted children often have difficult and sad and complicated stories. But that is not all. They also have really beautiful and miraculous and ordinary stories. And I like to really encourage people to highlight those, especially when kids are very young. I think sometimes because in our minds we have like this really big, scary story that we know at some point we need to like unravel more and more details of it. It almost like paralyzes us. Like we can't really talk about anything else, but I just want people to be talking about all these other little smaller stories all along the way, because in doing that, we are laying the groundwork for strong and secure identities.
That's
And
good.
so I really encourage people to take some time and reminisce about significant moments in their child's life, to pray that God would bring to mind anything that he wants to share with that child. And so spend some time praying and journaling and just being quiet. And, so think about any time that you have felt an extra measure of the Lord's grace on your child? Or was there a funny mistake that you made during the adoption journey? Or did you have an important interaction with a birth parent or a birth family member? What was it like when you saw your child for the first time? So any of these things can kind of be the start of a story that you can tell your child.
Yeah.
And this can be for a foster child, this can be for an adopted child, this can even be for a biological child. Like, kids love stories, and they love stories about them. And I think that repetition of story is just
Yeah.
really, really important.
Yeah.
And so, once you kind of have a list, once you have some ideas of a story, just start with one, pick one thing out, and then build from that. And because I am a picture book author, I kind of have story in my mind, and so we talk about like a traditional story structure. And I think that we can use that when building just these oral stories, like the stories that we verbally share. We don't necessarily have to write these down, although we absolutely can.
Yeah.
But like the traditional story structure, it kind of looks like a mountain, and we start with an introduction, and so that will be like a setting, a character, and once we have that established, then we introduce some kind of a conflict or a problem, and then kind of as we go up that mountain, we create rising tension or anticipation, and then we'll have like a climactic moment, and this doesn't have to be a huge climactic moment. We can kind of go through this with a story that I tell my daughter. And then we have kind of that downward slope of the mountain where we try to tie up some of these loose ends, and we try to find a sort of satisfying or hopeful resolution to some of the things that we have encountered. And then I always like to end with like a really important truth, some sort of like a biblical answer, or something that points our kids to Jesus. Like, I always want to be pointing our kids to Jesus as the author of our stories, and telling them like, oh, God makes really, really good stories. And sometimes they're long, and sometimes they have these hard struggles in them. But when we hang in there, these are good stories. And so do you want to kind of go through that with?
Yeah. Give us an example. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, so I'm just going to do like this really simple story about like our child coming home for the very first time in foster care. And so, that introduction piece will be something like, there were 6 people living in a tall red house. So now we have some people, and now we have a setting. And then we can present a problem. So we can say, but someone was missing. And then creating that anticipation or that rising action, we can say, there was a phone call about a little baby girl, and the family had to wait for her, and they waited for 1 day, and they waited for 2 days, and they waited for 3 days, and it was almost nighttime, and the sisters all had to get into their pajamas, and would she come before bedtime? And then we have this climactic moment when finally a car pulls into the driveway. And when we kind of take that downward slope of the mountain, and we're trying to tie up some of these loose ends, I say that, the baby was wearing jammies, just like the sisters were wearing jammies, and everyone gets to hold the baby. And that important truth that I get to tie in is that God's timing is just right. So you can kind of see how that's just a really simple, like basically we got a phone call, and, the caseworker dropped off a baby. But we can build into that, and we can expound on that, and we can make it kind of exciting for that 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old.
Yeah.
And so once we have kind of those basic points and that idea in our mind, then we can add some extra things in there. I like to start out with like a really strong, memorable first line, so that when I say it, that kid knows exactly where I'm going with that story, and they get so excited. And then we can add in like some sensory details, some feeling stuff, some dialogue. And every time we tell this story, it's going to come out a little different. And I don't want people to be like, it has to be the same. Like, no, it absolutely doesn't. And after you've told your child this story for a couple of times, when you miss a part, it's really fun, because then they remind you of it. They're like, wait, no, the pajamas, like everyone was in their jammies, and so they get to kind of jump in and participate in this.
Love it.
And pretty soon your child is going to be telling you that story over and over again. So we do these at bedtime, and driving in the car, and going for walks. And once you kind of have that first story, you can go back to your list that you and the Lord talked about, and you can say, like, what's next, Lord? What does my child, what can we pull out now? And so it's really fun and it's really easy, but I think sometimes we forget to do that. We forget that that is just really important. But when we tell these stories, I think it helps our kids to feel valued. I think
Mm,
it builds trust.
yeah.
And I think it creates this culture of openness. Like, we can talk
Yes.
about this stuff.
Yes.
And, it can be fun, and eventually these topics are going to get harder and harder,
Right.
but you'll have established that openness that
Yeah.
makes that to be really safe.
Yeah.
And I love, like, the things that my daughter has kind of said in regards to story and our storytelling. One time she said, Mom, tell me a story. Tell me a story that I already know. And I just loved that, because that was kind of, before I got really intentional about doing this, I was doing it in a way naturally. And that was kind of her saying, like, this is really valuable. This is so, like, I
Yeah.
love this, Mom. Um, Something else that she said one time that I just thought was really profound is, I don't know exactly what we were talking about at the time, but she was like, Mom, I have a question, but I don't know what it is. I just thought that was really interesting, because I
Yeah.
think there's something, in our kids, and especially in our adopted children, or stories that just have really big question marks in them. Like, they have that wondering, that I want to know more, but I don't even know how to ask.
Right.
And so this is a way that we can kind of help our kids along and start this conversation for them.
I love that. And thank you for taking us through that, because that's such a great example. It's simple. I love that you talk about just incorporating it in the normal routines of the day, and it doesn't have to be overly complicated. And I love this idea of building on the experience and it becoming habitual and a rhythm of your family, where the kids participate and they make sure that there's no part left out, or maybe they start to insert little funny details, as they go. And you're right. I mean, there's so much benefit from storytelling. And we've seen that through cultures across history. I mean, this is what was done. You would sit together as a family and you would tell stories. You would sit around a campfire and you would tell stories. And so you can see how beneficial this is. And here's what I love about this, Kate. I've heard from so many adult adoptees, especially in generations past, when we did have less awareness and fewer resources. An adoption story became something that it was a one time, oh, you're adopted. And it was a traumatic experience of telling their adoption story, because maybe they hadn't been told before. And then all of a sudden, there's this huge crash in identity and their story, because there was a huge part of their story that was left out, or it became something that we didn't want to talk about. So the adoptee might think, oh, this is bad, or it's something secretive and I don't, or this is something shameful. All of these things that are completely counterproductive and not what we as adoptive parents want to do for our kids. So I love the shift that I have seen in resources like yours and examples like you're telling us, with just ongoing storytelling, of making their story good and something to celebrate, and something to keep an open conversation at any given time. So y'all, I hope this is beneficial for y'all. It is definitely for me. It's a great reminder for me. My daughter loves stories. And, one of the things that we did was we created a life book for her.
Mm-hmm.
Just, we got on, one, I think it was Shutterfly or something like
Yeah.
that. And the first year of her life and all of the pictures, and that's in a
Yeah.
book form. And we can go through that anytime she wants to pick that book up. And it's got
Mm-hmm.
pictures of her bio family. It has pictures of extended family, all the things. And so it's created that safe space. And what that's done for her
Mm-hmm.
has been incredible. And so to add this oral story kind of bookshelf that you're talking about, I love, love, love. Such a great example. And as they get into the older years, the preteen years, the teen years, it's amazing how, even I have an 18-year-old, and sometimes we'll pull out stories that we read when he was little, and we'll just all plop on the couch or the bed together, dogs and all, and we'll read something and he'll engage with it just as much,
Mm-hmm.
even at 18 years old. So the
Mm-hmm.
value of that, memories of connection and celebrating who they are and their stories within the family, goodness gracious, so so valuable. I want to ask you, Kate, because I know that we would love for our kids to embrace this,
Mm-hmm.
every single time. But depending on how our kids are coming to us, depending on the trauma that they've experienced, depending on, their medical needs, their ability to process information, all the things, right? how would you encourage us to be able to incorporate this in a way that they're willing to receive it,
Hmm.
and it's respectful of their level of trauma? Does that
Hmm.
make sense what I'm
Hmm.
asking? If they're resistant to it initially, how do we kind of begin to introduce that when there's resistance and pushback? They're like, I don't want to connect with you. I don't want to talk about my
Hmm.
story. It's not a pleasant experience for them. It's
Hmm.
actually maybe triggering for them. I guess
Yeah.
that's sorry. It took me a minute to round about that and I figured it out. So
Yeah.
does my question make sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think that we can start with super non-threatening stories.
Yeah.
So like we don't want to start with stories that are going to be, really sensitive. We can start with a story that's funny, just some
Yeah.
snafu that we maybe even did on our adoption journey, or um, a time that you can like really celebrate something that you saw your kid did do, like just this really profound accomplishment, which might not be all that amazing to someone else, but when we have a kiddo with trauma, we can celebrate the small stuff for sure. And so
Right.
that's when I would spend some time with the Lord, reflecting on, like, God, what does my kid need to hear from me? What truth do you want me
That's
to
good.
tell them? And they don't always want to hear us talk, even, probably, and so then I wouldn't push it, but
Yeah.
have those stories ready and available for when your kid is feeling chatty, or when they're ready to listen.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say, like, if your kid isn't up for hearing this story, then don't talk about it.
Yeah.
But for our kids, especially the ones who come to us when they're a little bit younger, they're going to love to hear stories, especially initially, and then they're going to maybe get a little older and be like, "Oh, mom, I know," and so then, like, that's great. They know it, and that's going to be in there, and we've laid that foundation.
Yeah.
And so someday, my guess is that they're going to come back to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I would agree with that. I think that's really important. And, on the flip side of that, they may fully lean into this process. And as a result of that, some really hard and sad things come out,
Mm-hmm.
that maybe haven't even been disclosed to us as the foster or adoptive parent. And
Mm.
so, how would you encourage us to respond, not react, but
Mm-hmm.
respond, if and when some hard and sad things do come out as our kids are engaging with us in the storytelling process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't think that when our kids tell us something, they're necessarily even looking for us to respond. So I think just being a really good listener, and asking questions, maybe, like, if and well, first, allowing for pause, like, I want to jump in so quickly with either a question or an affirmation, and
Yeah.
that's good. But when my kid stops talking, to just sit there in my head and, like, count to 15 and see if they're done. Because
Good.
if I get to 9, and then all of a sudden they are able to go a little bit deeper, I could have cut that off, and I don't want to cut
Right.
that off.
That's a great
Um,
point.
so I think that I need to use way less words than what I would originally think that I would need to use.
Yeah.
And then maybe we both need to take some time to just sit with that information. And depending on what it is, maybe I need to have a conversation with a caseworker or a counselor or something like that. Like, hey, how do I approach this? I need to take that to the Lord. Lord, how do I respond to this? So we don't have to respond immediately. And I think that can take a lot of pressure off too. But just saying something like, "I'm so glad you told me that. Like, thank you for trusting me with that. Like, would you like a hug?" And then maybe that's it for then. And maybe we circle back to that another time. But I think just constantly, I feel like my answer to everything is just keeping in step with the Holy Spirit, checking in, like,
Absolutely.
Jesus, what do I do with this right now? Because He is our
Yeah.
greatest counselor.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I completely agree with that. And I think that's really practical. And it takes some pressure off of us as parents. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves,
For sure.
especially as adoptive parents and foster parents, because we're carrying the weight of what we know these children have experienced, things that in a perfect world, they would have never encountered. And so there's a lot of weight to that. So the more pressure we can take off of ourselves. And I love that you talk about that, just leaning into the Holy Spirit, asking Him for guidance, even taking pause before we answer a question, just to pray and ask the Lord to give us words. And I love, what a fantastic practical tip, to count in your head for that number of seconds and give them space, whether they want to continue what they're sharing or not. So, so good, Kate. I love that. Um, I want to ask, even just for really, it doesn't matter the age of our kiddo, but maybe just in your experience, some signs or some indicators that our kids do want to engage in more conversation about their adoption story. So you've given us some great practicals on how, as we're kind of finishing up our conversation today, let's talk a little bit more about the when it's appropriate, when they are indicating to us that they want to talk about it, and when we do need to maybe step back a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love what you said earlier about creating a Shutterfly book for your child that has some of those pictures and so forth. That's something that we did for our kiddo too. We also were able to include some like important paperwork. We have her original birth certificate along with her, birth certificate from adoption. So some
Oh,
of these
wow.
things, like just providing as much information as possible, not that would be important to a very, very young child, but what we're doing is we're making information accessible. And I think
Yeah,
that accessibility to information is huge. And
I agree.
so I encourage, adoptive parents to have a little bookshelf or a little basket in their child's room with books about adoption, with their life book. Just so that, and it's not that we need to like revisit this stuff all the time. Like we don't need to read them an adoption book every single night. We don't. But it's nice if it's in a place that's
Yeah,
theirs
that's
and that
right.
they know that they can go to this place
That's
whenever they
good.
want to. And so sometimes when I know that my daughter wants to talk about it, I will see her pulling out these books and I will see her going back to it. And that's an indication to me that she's thinking about it.
Yeah.
Sometimes she'll bring something to me and she'll show something to me. And so, I try as much as possible to let her lead these conversations and the timing of them too.
Yeah, I think that's so good. Yeah, I would echo that as well. And when it becomes a normalcy for them, I think that is, you are already so many steps ahead and serving them well and loving them well by providing that accessibility and just that availability to discuss it at any point in time. So Kate, as we're closing out our conversation, I always love for our guests just to leave a word of encouragement for to kind of meet our families where they are. So when it comes to talking to our kids about their adoption story, what word of encouragement, maybe something that you've learned along the way, something you wish you knew early on that now you've learned a result as a result of this journey, what would you share with our listeners today?
Um, I think that I would say that strong identities are built in layers over time. So sometimes I just want to do all the layers all at once. Like, I just want to make this okay. I want to say all the right things and do all the right things. And I have to just remind myself that learning comes in layers and that, these books are just so important and so valuable. It's a layer. The things that your guests come on your podcasts and they talk about, like, those are layers. And so for that adoptive parent to not feel like they have to implement every single thing that they hear from every single person and do it right now and do it in just the right way, like, I just really want to take that pressure off. And we're just, this is a journey. Oh, it's such a long journey. And that's okay. And that's the way it's meant to be, because that is how it's going to be the most lasting, the most solid. Um, yeah, and to not be afraid. Like, I don't want parents. I was so afraid, like there's some hard stuff in my kid's life, and that initially created some fear in me. But knowing that, like, the Lord's in charge of this, and He loves my kid more than I do, and she's the Lord's daughter more than she is mine, and He's going to take care of her. And so to trust some of these things just back on the Lord and be like, God, you're going to have to take this.
Yeah,
Um, I just, yeah. Ah, I, I
I
just
love
want
it.
to give all those listeners a hug and tell them they're doing a really good job, because they are, and they're here and they're present and they want to learn. And so I just want to say good job, moms and dads.
So good. I love that. Wonderful word of encouragement. I needed to hear that today, honestly, because I'm that one that wants to just like, what was it? Like the Matrix, they just plug it in the brain and you just know it all right up,
Yes.
like
Mm-hmm.
if we had that for adoptive parenting, that would have
Mm-hmm.
been great. And I was just desperate for that. And sometimes I've hindered connection and progress because I've wanted to just
Mm.
cram in all the fixes and the healing and all the tactics and all the tools and things. And I have had to learn. And that's something God's taught me. through this journey of just be patient and let him work in his
Mm-hmm.
timing and in his way. And I learn along the way just as much as my child does. And
Mm-hmm.
that's beautiful and that's good and that's right. So embracing the journey is so important. Kate, I love it. I love the work that you're doing. I am just so grateful for everything that you've shared with us today. I want to make sure that our listeners can get a copy of these beautiful resources, y'all. Again, All the Babies, so, so beautiful, sweet, simple, precious moment of connection with your children. And then When God Makes Scribbles Beautiful, and then the little conversation starter cards as well. Y'all are going to want to access these. So, Kate, how can they do that?
Um, your local Christian bookstore, if you have one. Otherwise, Amazon or bookshop.com. It should be available anywhere books are sold. And then you can find more information on my website, which is just my name, kateridema.com. Those little printable promise cards that you showed earlier, those are available for free as a download on my website. So you don't even have to buy the book if you don't want to. You can just go right there and print some of those off. But they do go along really well with the book. And there's some other resources there. My publisher creates something called Parent Connection Sheets, and those have some questions that go along with the books to help spark more conversations. And that can just be really helpful when you feel like, ooh, how do I take this conversation to the next level? You might want to check those out as well. And I am on Instagram and Facebook just with my name, Kate Ridema.
Okay, fantastic. All right, friends, I'm going to have those links in today's show notes so that you can click over and access each of those and then get in touch with Kate. If you've got follow-up questions based on the conversation that we've
Mm-hmm.
had today, my email is in the show notes. And Kate, I'm sure you would love a direct message on
Mm-hmm, for
social
sure.
media to hear from our listeners. We really have become a fantastic community, and I just love hearing from y'all. So please don't hesitate to reach out and follow up if you have any thoughts based on today's conversation. So, so helpful. Kate, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for being my guest.
Thank you, Summer. This is wonderful.
Thank you so much for listening to Called to Love today. I love to hear from listeners, and so I would love to connect with you to hear your stories and answer your questions right here on the show. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram, send me a direct message, or send me an email at the link in today's show notes. I pray you have been encouraged by today's episode to walk in faith and continue to embrace your own call to love. Until next time, blessings, sweet friends.